Hey, what's up?
What's up? Um, so I was thinking about threshold deontology.
Sure.
And there was maybe I just have a misunderstanding. Um, but I was like comparing it to utilitarianism.
Okay.
Um, so I'm utilitarian, by the way. Um, and so if utilitarianism um is mostly about maximizing pleasure, um, and then with threshold deontology, if there's like um your main sort of thing that you value is rights and until a certain threshold. Um, so it seems that like um, what pleasure is, at least in my view, is the satisfaction of desires. Um, so when it comes to threshold deontology, if you just if you just desire, if you think a world that includes some protection of rights is more desirable, how is that different from a view of like maximizing pleasure?
Yeah, so there are circumstances where I think most people would say the protection of rights is more important than maximizing pleasure. So, say if 20 men were raping one woman, the only way to stop or prevent them from raping that woman was to kill them all. I think most people would say, okay, well, you're eliminating like 20 people from the population who could experience well-being in the future. Uh, but you're doing that in the interest of protecting that woman's rights. Now, you could have, I think a utilitarian position would result in you having to let that woman be raped, so that 20 people could go on to experience whatever well being in their life. So, I think you're just going to end up in a situation where, yeah, like, where we have the interest of, creating outcomes that we want. And I just don't have any sympathy for, perpetrators, people who are violating the rights of others. But I do have sympathy for the innocent. Um, Now, there is a threshold, let's say, where let's say the entire planet were to try to rape one woman. Would I be in favor of like annihilating the entire human species just so one person doesn't get raped? Like, that's kind of in an extreme where maybe in that circumstance, just because of the the extremity of the situation where you're going to have like no future for the human race because everyone's dead. Yeah. I think threshold deontology just ends up making more sense.
Yeah, so I mean, I can see sort of um the like practical differences and how like a threshold deontologist would make a decision versus like a classic like utilitarian. I just struggle to see the ultimate how the ultimate value is different. Again, if pleasure just comes down to the satisfaction of desires. So, like as far as threshold deontology goes, it just seems like the claim is that yeah, a world that protects rights is more desirable.
Yeah. Yeah. At least for me. And I think it leads to better overall outcomes.
So yeah, so then I guess I would just struggle. It seems like the threshold deontologist just comes in and says, "Hey, we know how to do utilitarianism correctly."
No. Because again, you're often in situations where you do generate more harm. It's just that again, like I personally do not have sympathy for somebody who'd take the rights away from others. I'm not. I don't just have the interest of maximizing well-being. I just don't have any sympathy for the perpetrators.
Okay, so you would like bite the bullet on making like a slightly to moderately less happy world if it meant like the protection of rights.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And your value of rights, what does that come from? Is it
Um,
just sort of intuition or?
well, it's just like one of my axiomatic beliefs. Like, I don't know of any way to really justify it. It's just something, it's just one of my preferences. Would you personally be okay with the idea of you getting like tortured for the sake of many other people, I don't know, benefiting from it?
Yeah, well, I actually do hold that view. So I am a pretty like down to earth like utilitarian. Um, but I'm also not a moral realist, so I don't hold the view that like utilitarianism is like the objective. I just have the intuition that yeah, I ought to be tortured if it means like
Really?
increasing well-being. Yeah.
So you think you should have like your kidneys stolen if it would save the life of somebody else?
Yeah, I do hold that view.
Okay,
Um,
I think that's
it gets
insane.
um it becomes really complicated when we start looking into like the broader like aspect of potential consequences. But like yeah, in a vacuum, I think the doctor ought to harvest the organs if he can get away with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's insane. And I think most people have an interest in protecting themselves. And I think they also have an interest in protecting others. So the only way to really do that is with rights. If you're going to have a purely utilitarian position, yeah, you can have your organs stolen. You could be like horrifically tortured or mutilated or killed for the interest of others. Um, so I think the only way like society really works is if there is some kind of concept of rights.
Well, I mean, you could have some sort of rules that would look something like rights in a utilitarian. So it like it makes sense. So under
You could have
utilitarianism,
something that looks like rights and have utilitarianism. It's not necessarily mutually exclusive, but again, it would be hard to set any kind of distinct rules because you could have a marginal situation where okay, breaking that rule would create more well-being. So you don't really have rights. You only have privileges when the circumstances interest you.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I would agree they're not like entirely rights. That's they look something like rights. Um, but yeah, in a utilitarian like world, it would still make sense to have some sort of like laws against murder or things like that.
Yeah, but again, that's only circumstantial. It would be under the circumstance where it interests all parties.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't
All
want to
right.
live in a world where I can get my kidney stolen. I think most people wouldn't. And there's just
Well,
again, I don't think anybody has to act in the interest of others. I think the only responsibility you have is to not violate the rights of others.
interesting. Yeah, I don't hold that view. I
Well, let me put it this way: you have a keyboard in the background.
yeah.
Um, I'm assuming that keyboard probably cost a few $100. That few $100 might actually be able to save several people in Africa. Are you being utilitarian? Like, so
No.
I don't think you
Yeah.
actually believe that idea that you have to maximize well-being because again, I don't think your life would be dramatically worsened by having that keyboard, and you would be able to save the lives of probably several other people. You can look at like statistics when it comes to donating a certain amount of money to certain charities, how many lives that would save. Like you could probably pay for somebody's food for years with that kind of money, like starving people. So I don't think you really believe in this idea that you have a responsibility to maximize well-being.
So yeah, so I kind of have an answer to that. So I do hold like the Peter Singer position about the drowning child. Um, and I would just say that by buying this keyboard, I did the wrong thing. And I'm constantly doing the wrong thing. But I do kind of view morality on a scale of like the moral rightness or the moral wrongness
I
of an
don't think
action
you
is just
really
kind of
believe
just
that. Do you like genuinely feel bad about buying a keyboard?
um if I reflect on it then I do. But like in the moment of buying the keyboard, I'm excited. I'm a musician, so I like to write songs, so I'm excited to have a keyboard to write songs on. But on reflection, yeah, I should have just donated the money to a charity. Um,
But do you like actually feel bad? Like does it keep you up at night? Do you get that like nagging feeling in the back of your head that like you shouldn't have done that? I just have a hard time believing that you'd actually feel that way.
I Yeah, I do feel like I can always like do more and I'm not doing enough. Um, but I do think overall I'm on the scale of uh I'm over the line of like I'm generally increasing utility. Um, I'm vegan. I don't buy a whole I don't have a ton of possessions. I don't even like have a bed currently. Um, so I live a pretty minimalist lifestyle. My piano and my computer are probably like the most expensive things I have.
All right, yeah, like we clearly have different values fundamentally, but yeah, I would just say I just don't think a world where people can steal each other's kidneys is a good world to live in. Even if, in theory, it generates more overall well being, um, I just don't like the idea that anybody can have their rights taken away given a certain set of circumstances.
Well, what if the society didn't know that it was happening? Like what if again the doctor got away with it?
Well, I think you'd know if you have a kidney missing. I don't think it really results in lower life expectancy, but you do have to piss more often. And
Which
again,
is
if you do have injury, like some sort of kidney injury, well, then you're kind of screwed and then you have to steal a kidney from somebody else.
So I'm just talking about like in principle. So I wouldn't hold the view that in the real world we should like be stealing kidneys. I'm talking just but in a vacuum, um, right? If a doctor could steal a kidney, get away with it, the person doesn't realize they've lost a kidney. It doesn't like create a society where like that's now like seen as like an allowed thing. Um,
Yeah, I still think that's wrong. So if you're gonna like the rape analogy would work perfectly with this too. If there's a woman who's unconscious and somebody wanted to have sex and then raped her while she was unconscious, she would never know about it. You've then increased well-being in the world because the guy who's looking for sex got pleasure from raping the woman and she didn't get any harm from the rape. Like do you think that's a good thing then under utilitarianism?
so the first thing to mention is that like in my view, rarely does like sadistic pleasure actually bring about well-being. But if it did, then
It's not
yeah, I would
necessarily
I would hold that.
sadistic.
I would hold the view.
So you'd support that idea if it weren't like sadistic and it happened in a vacuum.
Yeah, yeah. I'll basically kind of bite any bullet on this. Like, if it increases pleasure, then yeah, I'm
Yeah, I'd say that's fucked up.
yeah. I wouldn't say so, but I mean I can understand. I and I used to say that like I know when I first got into like sort of like moral philosophy, um, I was like a utilitarian, and then I was introduced to these like uh reductios, and it felt weird, and I sort of became sort of more of like a threshold deontologist, and then I reverted back to utilitarianism, just because I think upon reflection I realized I actually the thing I really cared about was pleasure. And actually, we've seen this too. There's been like, I mean, I kind of just showed up here, so I don't really have like the studies with me, but there's been like studies showing that upon reflection, um people tend to be more sympathetic towards utilitarianism.
Maybe, but I think the way it's talked about, it's usually talked about in a um kind of giving, compassionate sense. So when you talk about utilitarianism as like giving to charity, and I think people kind of more intuitively agree with it, like, oh yeah, increasing well-being, that's good. I think it's a little more heady to talk about rights versus just well-being. But again, like pretty much every society is structured in a way where you use threshold deontology. I think there's a reason for that. I don't think societies can really exist with this idea of just pure utilitarianism. Like, would if we do, like, do you think like nobody should be able to have any wealth? Like, do you support the idea that like maybe a government should oversee wealth and all money should go to like a centralized system and then be distributed like relatively equally at least, like things like that? Because
I
like
mean, I'm
it's
not.
like communism's never really worked, but it was this idea of spreading wealth equally, trying to benefit the most amount of people as possible. You could say there are some utilitarian beliefs within communism, but like it's just never really worked.
So yeah, I mean, utilitarianism is consequential, right? Like it's a so like I'm a consequentialist as a utilitarian. So if we try something and it doesn't work, I don't see how why that would
So
be
you'd support
utilitarian.
threshold deontology if it produced the most amount of well-being?
Yeah, I would.
Okay, yeah, it's kind of ironic, but all right. I think we kind of are at a point where we just have to like agree to disagree because we clearly just have fundamentally different ethical beliefs. Yeah, but it
Yeah,
was
I
it
mean,
was a nice chat, dude.
yeah, I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Yeah, take care.